you want to turn your Bibles with me to John chapter 9. John chapter 9. Lord, I pray you speak to us. Reveal to us your plan and your purpose for this morning, your word. And ask, Lord, that you speak to us. There are some people who are born able to see, and then their sight gradually deteriorates, but this man had never seen. So it says this: now, as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was born blind from birth. His disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. Yeah. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. When he had said these things, he spat on the ground and made a clay with his saliva. He anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. And he said to him, go and wash yourself in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. Amazing, isn't it? Amazing miracle. You can imagine him as he's walking to the pool, like with his walking stick, and he's got all this stuff in his eyes, and he's walking, probably maybe trying to find where this pool is being directed or something. And as he's doing this, I wonder whether questions would have been going through in his mind, thinking, is this really worth it? I mean, surely if this man were God, he could have healed me. But he just carried on walking. It must have been a difficult walk, trying not to trip Dennis, as he was walking in those last few moments of blindness, when actually he would have had to trust. You come back to that word trusting, isn't it? And obey. So he went and he washed and he came back seeing. That tiny phrase has so much in it. Therefore, the neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind said, is this not he who sat and begged? Some said, this is he. Others said, yeah, he looks like him. But he said, I am he, it is me, it is me. Therefore they said to him, how are your eyes opened? He answered and said, a man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, go and wash. Go to the pool of Siloam and wash.
How would he know where if he's blind?
He would have probably had people who would have been looking after him, who would have helped him. So I went and washed, and I received sight. Then he said to them, where is he? Where is this Jesus? He said, I do not know. So then they now bring him to the Pharisees. They brought him, who formerly was blind, to the Pharisees. Now it was Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also asked him again how he had received his sight. He said to them, he put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. Therefore some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath. Others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? And there was a division among them. They said to the blind man again, "What do you say about him? Because he opened your eyes." He said, "He is a prophet." But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight, until they called the parents of him who had received his sight. And they asked him, saying, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered and said, "We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But by what means he now sees, we do not know. Or who opened his eyes, we do not know. He is of age. Ask him. He will speak for himself." His parents said these things because they were afraid. They feared the Jews. For the Jews had already agreed that if anyone confessed that he was the Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age. Ask him." So they again called the man who was blind and said to him, "Give God the glory." Very strange phrase, isn't it? "Give God the glory. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered and said, "Whether he is a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I know, that though I was blind, now I see." Then they said to him again, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" Then they reviled him and said, "You are his disciple, but we are Moses' disciples. We know that God spoke to Moses. As for this fellow, we do not know where he is from." The man answered and said to them, "Why, this is a marvelous thing, that you do not know where he is from, yet he opened my eyes. Now we know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is a worshipper of God and does his will, he hears him. Since the world began, it has been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one who was born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered and said to him, "You were completely born in sins and are teaching us." And so they cast him out. Jesus heard that they had cast him out. And when he had found him, clearly Jesus went looking for him. So Jesus heard that he had cast him out, and when he had found him, he said to him, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" The all-important question. Do you believe in the Son of God? He answered and said, "Who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him?" And Jesus said to him, "You have both seen him, and it is he who is talking with you." Then he said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped. And Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, that those who do not see may see, and that those who may see may be made blind." And some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words and said to him, "Are we blind also?" And Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But now you say, 'We see.' Therefore, your sin remains." There, what he is talking about is, towards the end there, the Pharisees were kind of going, "Are you saying that we're blind? You're talking to us?" In the Italian accent, "You're talking to me?" And Jesus turns around and said, "Well, like, if you were blind, it wouldn't be such a big problem. at least you would know that you are blind and you would admit that you're blind. But the thing is that you say that you see, and really you are blind. Now, it's a fascinating thing that Jesus, at the beginning of this time, the disciples, it's one of these few times when actually Jesus approaches the person who was going to be healed. More often than not, if you wanted to receive from Jesus, it is you that had to get up off your backside and had to run to him. In this instance, like was the case in John chapter 5, we saw earlier with the man at the pool of Bethesda. With this man, we see that Jesus happened to be passing by and he saw this man who was blind. And then he engages the disciples in a conversation. Was this man born this way because of something his parents did? See, the Jewish had a good understanding of generational sin. Anybody know what generational sin is?
No, generational curse.
Generational curses. You can have generational blessings as well. It's this idea that the things that your parents do, the things that your...
An effect on you.
Can have an effect on you, exactly. It's a good thing, by the way, to study your family, to study some of the things that are struggles in your family, because there's a potential that they might affect you. It's a good thing then to engage God in a conversation, to recognize that I can see that, like, in my grandparents and in my great-grandparents, these are the sorts of things that happened. And if you don't know, if you don't have that information, you can always ask God to show you. God is more than capable of showing you through things like dreams, through people that suddenly just come and tell you, oh, by the way, this and this and this was happening with your grandparents and things like that. It's a good thing to study your family because sometimes some of your struggles have their roots, have their inception in the things that are going on in your forebears, your parents and your great-grandparents, or grandparents and great-grandparents. And so the Jews, they have this understanding, they recognize this. By the way, one more thing about that is that when studying your family, if you spot things, there are some things that kind of are repetitive. So for example, if you see things like marriage struggles, if you see things like premature death, if you see things like people continually struggling with ailments, with illnesses, if you see things like people, and by the way, it can work the other way in terms of a blessing. So for example, I'm from a family of musicians. My parents are passionate about music. Their parents are passionate about music. I'm from a family of people who are very keen about serving in the church. And so my grandparents, so it was like a blessing that came down, and they were passionate about serving in the church. And we were talking about this a while back, weren't we, with Eloise, how her parents, she could see with her grandparents there was art there, and there was all this artistic gift, and it had come down the generations. So the blessings happen as well as the bad things. So some of your strengths, it may be that the inception, the beginning of them, is actually way back there, where God decided to put something of a blessing in the family, maybe out of the obedience of somebody, and then you get to benefit. But anyhow, the Jews have this understanding, very clear understanding from Scripture, that the sins of the fathers are passed on to the third and the fourth generation. And so they were like, okay, this man's blind. Jesus, why is he blind? Can you tell us why he's blind? Incidentally, there is another principle here, which is this idea that very often the struggles that we go through have a root. Jesus would have been walking around with his disciples and teaching them, and one of the things that he would have taught them is that sometimes what you see are just the symptoms. But then very often, as you see people going through life with struggles, or even in our own lives with our struggles, the things that we could be struggling with are probably symptomatic of something that might have its roots somewhere else. So the disciples were like, okay, Jesus, help us to understand this. What's really going on here? And then Jesus says something curious. He says, it's nothing to do with his parents. It's nothing to do with what they've done. Incidentally, Jesus knows everything about us. That's one of his abilities as a shepherd. You know, in Middle Eastern times, when you were a shepherd, you knew not just the sheep, but you knew the mommy sheep, you know the mother of the sheep, you know the grandmother of the sheep, you know the grandmother, you would be able to trace all the way. Even in this country, I understand, they do have something like that. where they can trace the bloodline exactly of a sheep. Jesus here says that it's nothing to do with the man or their family or their parents, but actually it's so that the works of God might be revealed. It is so that the glory of God, the works of God might be made clear. There are sometimes God will allow things in our lives because He wants us to learn about Him in that process. And sometimes it can be difficult things, that it can be struggles that we go through. And in that, He wants us to learn how He works, for example. So life with God is not always going to be happy-clappy. If anybody tells you Christian life is all about happy-clappy, they are lying. So there are some things that are there just for the works. And then Jesus says something peculiar. He says, as long as I am in this world, I am the light of the world. Now, in the very first chapter of John describes Jesus as the light that shines, and the darkness has not overcome it. Jesus uses this word light on purpose. Firstly, because He says the darkness is coming. So I must work the works of God, because there is coming a time when I will not be able to work the works of God. Put it simply, that there's coming a time when persecution will be so rife that it will be difficult for me to carry on doing what I am doing. That is so in the world, by the way. There is coming a time when, at the moment, we can meet like this, but there is coming a time when even meeting like this might put us in a lot of trouble. It is not an accident that the next thing that happens through this whole story, we see the end of the story is the man is actually kicked out of the synagogue. These are the darkness. So what Jesus is saying is, work while the light is there, because actually there is coming a time when you'll be kicked out of synagogues. You'll be you'll be treated really badly because of my name. So Jesus declares Himself as the light. Now, what do we use light for?
To see.
To see. Exactly. Anybody walk into a dark room? You grope around. Where's the light switch? Here's the light switch. I give the light switch because I can't see. And then you flick the light switch and suddenly, bing, you can see. So Jesus was using that phrase very much on purpose. Here you have a blind man. Yes, George?
Light can sometimes guide you.
Yes, that's true. It can help you to see what's ahead. So Jesus was using this expression that He Himself is the light of the world. To put it simply, without Jesus, the world is doing this. If you don't have Jesus in your life, this is what you're doing. Any of you have friends who don't know Jesus personally? This is what they're doing. They might just accidentally stumble on something that they realize, oh, this is who I am. Sometimes you meet people who do not know Jesus, and they have a good grasp of who they are. You ever met people like that? And so they're expressing their gifts, they're expressing their abilities, they kind of know who they are in a sense. There's something in their spirit that they're expressing, like athletes or lawyers or talent, whatever. But if they do not know Jesus, it's like they just stumble upon it. Yeah, oh, this is who I am. Okay, I'll give this a go. Oh, yeah, this is actually quite fun. And they end up doing it, and they're doing it. Jesus describes Himself as the light of the world. Jesus never lied, by the way. So when He describes Himself as the light of the world, that means that exactly, it's lights on.
Has Jesus ever sinned? I don't think so, has He?
He's never sinned. That's a very good question.
Why would He?
He has never sinned. In fact, if you see in the world today, a lot of people try to pull down Jesus and make Him to become like a human being. They make Him to become, so many people you talk to about Jesus, they'll say, yeah, He's a good teacher. Or maybe He was a prophet. Or maybe He was a good guy. He did some good things. What really is behind that is they don't want to acknowledge that He is the Son of God. What they're trying to do is make Him like you and me. And the implication behind that is He sinned. He made mistakes like we do, and He whatever. And the implication behind that is He cannot save us. Because the only sacrifice that God would accept for our salvation is a sinless one. It's an unblemished one. So Jesus here describes himself as different. He is the light. Notice the word the. There are some religions that say there are other lights in the world. There are many.
Some of the light bulbs, some of the candles. It's very
Yes, but Jesus describes himself as the light of the world. This was such an exclusive, everything else omitting phrase that Jesus uses. That actually, without him, you are groping, you're lost, you're in darkness, and that is the state of all of us. That's why we need Jesus. So Jesus then tells this man, "Go and wash." He spits on the ground. He anoints the clay with his hands. We've got no idea why he did that. No idea. There's some things Jesus does.
I was thinking that, but I can't.
That's what I was
Like,
like.
just
When you said, I was
a bit strange.
It is a strange thing. There are some things Jesus does and we have no idea. Could it be that there might be something on the fact that from dust we came and from dust we all shall return? That there was something of him taking that which was of the dust and making, because remember, somebody who's never seen, he probably didn't have any of the tissues and the cells and everything that I needed to
Healing
make
comes in
eyes.
different forms.
Sorry?
Healing comes in different forms.
And there's different ways, healing can come as well. So it might be that through the dust and through the clay and the water, that he was making something out of nothing. It could be that it was all just to do with obedience. That all he wanted was that man to go and wash his eyes. We don't know. We don't know. There are some times when it comes to God wanting you to set you free from something, when he will give you instruction. He will say to you, go and do X, Y, and Z. Grace, do you have a question?
As well, it's like being clean again.
Yes. There
I think there's
could
someone
be.
else in the building.
Yes,
Yeah,
and some people just come
Very
into
sweet.
But also, like, since when Jesus did this, there's no one else who imitated Jesus and say, I've done this, so they cannot claim and say, oh yeah, Jesus did that.
He was copying somebody.
I was copying, I can also do it. It's only Jesus who can.
There are some things, and I think it's to do with him being creator. He wrote the program, and so only he does things sometimes that are just like when he walked on water. Why did he walk on water? And only he can do that.
Yeah.
You can't explain it that he can. He wrote gravity. According to gravity, really, he should have sunk. But he walked on the water. It's like he defied gravity. So it was like he was saying, I am the one in charge of all these laws, by the way. He is exactly. So, then basically, he goes and heals this man. This man actually is obedient. He goes and washes his eyes and he receives the healing. Now, I wanted really, the nub of the message today is whatever Jesus tells you to do it, do it. You have no idea what the implication is. This man got given an instruction, it seemed really strange. He was told, go and wash in a pool somewhere. When God gives you an instruction, even if at the start of that instruction it seems impossible, even if it doesn't make sense, go and do it. Just go and do it. Step out there and do it. If you have this something within you, this sense that God is wanting you to do something, just step out. It might be as you do that other things will begin to make sense in that process. This man went, he washed himself, and lo and behold, he got healed. It must have been a fascinating journey from where he met Jesus all the way to the pool, where I'm sure there have been all sorts of questions going on in his mind, going, why am I doing this? Why did he just heal me, for example? But he did it. He was obedient. So, what then transpires is there is this wrestle, this tug that happens because the Pharisees, they're like baffled by the fact that this man who was born blind has now been healed. And so you see how they try and rubbish his testimony.
Because
At first
they
they're
try
like,
to condense it to their own understanding.
sorry?
They try to confine it to their own understanding.
Yes, they try to. But more than that, worse than that, they try to rubbish his testimony. They say, you weren't really born blind. Come on. There's no way you were born blind. I mean, come on, tell us. Were you really, really like born blind?
That's really bad.
Yeah. They're trying to rubbish his testimony. Because according to their understanding and according to their belief, really, they couldn't see it happening.
Even with like some of them, I'm sure some people saw him blind.
Well, it's paid to know. It's bad.
And then they're like, were you actually blind or were you?
It's a very good
I'm
point.
like, of course he was blind. He wasn't thinking the whole time.
Well, if he's bumping into walls and staring at them, then yeah, I think he's blind, most likely, if you've seen him like that.
It is
It would take a
true.
lot of time and effort to fake blindness. It would be so much work.
It is true, but isn't it something? And one of the things that we because we live in a culture that's very mental, that's very, very scientific. If things are logical, then we can accept that. And so, have you ever experienced that questioning in your heart when you hear a miracle, or you hear of a miracle, or you see, and you're like, did that really, really happen? Did that really, really happen? Now, all of us, I'm sure, experienced that. I don't know about you, but I'm thinking, if I was there and I was sitting there seeing this guy, there'd have been a little bit of a question in me that would have been going like, really?
It's hard though because there are fake prophets now who pay people to fake
To fake miracles, that's true.
It depends where you're coming from. Are you coming from a questioning point of view, looking to give God the glory?
Yeah.
Or are you coming from the point of view that you're trying to diminish his powers?
Yes.
Where are you coming from?
Are you coming from a cynical kind of where you're trying to be judgmental and whatever?
Exactly.
When we are children, actually, the younger we are, those of you that are children, you are very, there's a word, an English word for it, it's escaped my mind. You accept things much more readily. You're very, what's the
Is it
word?
gullible?
Not gullible, it's impressionable. Impressionable. In other words, you can take on things very quickly without questioning. In fact, that's why as adults we have to be very careful sometimes what we tell you guys, because if we tell you lies, you could end up believing it. That's why you get kids believing there's a Santa, for example. And then they grow up and they reach a certain age and they're like, actually there isn't a Santa. What?
It's Satan, though. Watch out.
Santa,
Yeah.
can I just tell you?
Yeah,
Santa,
yeah.
replace the N and the A.
Basically,
So
it's a
switch
real
the
brain
N and the A with the
And
T.
guess what you get?
Satan.
You do, exactly. It is another thing. So, children have this big advantage that their spirits are open. They haven't yet been clouded by all the stuff in the world and all the sort of, actually, what we get through education sometimes, where actually you're taught to question everything. There is an element of okayness in that you're not supposed to just receive everything. You're meant to have a sense of being exactly, and prodding things, not just accept things. But sometimes it can take that too far and it becomes unbelief. And then when it becomes unbelief, then we can actually stop God from doing what he does. Which is what the Pharisees tried to do all along. They were like, nah, this didn't really happen. This didn't really happen. Come on. They even got his parents along, and the parents were like, well, ask him, because the parents were afraid. And so because of that, they kind of said, no, let the man speak for himself. The man went on to testify. This is the other thing I want you to really grasp hold of. Your testimony is powerful. How Jesus came into your life, how he opened your eyes to realize who he is, it is so very powerful. I mean, I came to know about Jesus and came to believe in him when I was a child and grew up knowing about him. Even still as a child, there are some people who have a soul. One day they're walking around the road to Damascus and then suddenly, boom, big light flashing, whatever. A bit like Nigel. Anybody remember Nigel?
Yeah.
He had an amazing experience. Some of us, it's a gradual thing. We grow up in a Christian home and it's gradually, and then there comes a moment when you realize, I've got to trust this man. I have to believe in him because he is who he says he is. Whatever the situation is, your testimony is powerful. Because these Pharisees, despite all their schemings, they could not argue with this man's testimony. They could not argue with the fact that this man, the way he said it, I was blind, but now I see.
Simple.
Very simple story. It's a good thing, by the way, to try and condense your testimony, your story, as short as possible. I used to drink, and now I don't drink. I used to gamble, but now I don't gamble. I used to do this, but now I don't do this. Having a very short story that leaves people thinking, there's no way that could happen, possibly. It's a very powerful thing. So, basically, God can do whatever he wants. There's kids screaming out there. God can do whatever He wants. There's nothing impossible for Him. The thing is, when He wants to do something in your life, like this blind man, He may well give you instruction. He may tell you, do this and that and the other. Jesus could have healed him on the spot, but He gave him a little bit of an exercise. And sometimes God is like that with us. He gives us a little bit of an exercise, because as we do that, there's something it does on the inside. It allows us to fight the doubts. It allows us to fight those voices on the inside that are saying, is this really pointless? Is there anything to this? This whole story is really about the fight against unbelief. The Pharisees were all unbelieving. The whole thing around them was just unbelief. And this man was given a little task to do, which would help him fight the unbelief in his own heart as he washed his eyes, that he would see who Jesus really is. You can see how he gradually moves on. Initially he says, you're a prophet, but later on towards the end of the story he says, you are the Son of God. He confesses it when he's told the one who's speaking to you is He. So God will give you instruction depending on where you are, and it's an important thing to obey. If the man had never decided to go to the pond and wash himself, he probably would have never become blind. The other way around. Not have seen.